Over to you, Vladimir.
Oh, thank you very much. Hello, everyone. We are here to talk about Diataxis. Basically, this is introduction to Diataxis. Let's start with the very first slide about me personally, who I am. I'm working at Canonical. You might have heard about this company, the creators and distributors of the Ubuntu operating system, one of the most popular Linux distributors, but also we have lots and lots of products, and specifically I work in a big data department, basically Apache Spark, Apache Kafka, our own flavors of it, distributed environments, that kind of stuff I'm documenting. And I'm specializing in developer-oriented software. I have lots of experience in this topic, more than a decade already, and I consider myself to be a Doxas code advocate. So feel free to contact me via LinkedIn if you want to discuss some of these topics. I will be very eager to do so. And I'm a certified member of the ISTC. I'm leading the London area group. If you want to meet me in person, we are meeting at South Bank Center. I think every 2 months we meet in person and sometimes do it online. So let's move on to the main topic of today's meeting. What is Diataxis? And let's start with the direct translation from ancient Greek. The word Diataxis consists of dia, which is across, and taxis, which is arrangement. Basically, roughly can be translated into layout, but that's not what we will be talking about, not the ancient Greek. We'll be talking about the definition, how, well, specifically, we in Canonical see it as in a systematic approach to technical documentation authoring. And quite often we refer to it as some kind of documentation framework. And that's the framework we actually using quite a lot in Canonical. So yeah, it's widely adopted in our company at the moment. And I think it was created by our documentation director, Daniela Procida. So let's move on to alternative meaning, which we will not be using today in this particular talk, which is a guidebook for the service of the Divine Liturgy in Eastern Orthodox Christianity. I find it funny because I'm come from basically Eastern Orthodox Christianity, so it's very relevant to me personally. But let's move on to the framework definition of it. Basically, Diataxis for documentation is a framework, like I told you so, and there is a whole website created by Daniela Procida talking about Diataxis. You can find it easily on the internet. I think it's diataxis.fr. And it talks about Diataxis and explains in many different ways what Diataxis is and refers to it as a systematic approach or a way of thinking or a pragmatic approach for people working on documentation. But really, it's all of that. It's we can call it an approach in many ways, and we use it in many ways. And our users who read our documentation in Canonical actually use it too. And I'll be talking about how we do that and why it's so important and how it can help. But the core idea of the whole Diataxis is that we concentrate our efforts on the needs of users to be able to optimize our documentation. And specifically, Diataxis prescribes 4 different kinds of documentation, specifically tutorials, how-to guides, explanations, and references. Let's talk a little bit about this particular image. You might have seen it already. If not, if you Google Diataxis, you will most probably encounter multiple different versions of this particular compass, how we call it, or map. This is a Diataxis map, basically showing you these 4 categories in a 2-dimensional space. Yes, those are the dimensions, basically practice versus theory, or study versus work. And there is some kind of understanding of how it works and why it works so well that I will be talking about. But for now, I just want to show you these pictures, or you might have recognized it already reading somewhere on the internet about it. And well, let's talk directly how it works. I consider technical writers and technical authors, how we call ourselves in Canonical, to be most of all professionals in communication. So basically, that's our craft. Every document we create is a message, and basically it's an attempt to communicate some idea or multiple ideas to the readers or users. And if we consider technical documentation, I refer to readers as users most often because they, well, use our products. Otherwise, why would they read our documentation, right? So that's specifically the subject area I'm working with, as in software documentation. I will be referring most of my examples to this field, but the same approach actually goes for any technical documentation, so it could be non-software related for sure. And one particular aspect that is very important for us today is how to make the communication most efficient. The efficiency of the communication, I think, comes from answering two questions, really. Who is the targeted audience, so we can address it, and what is the goal of this communication? We need to think about it, right? Speaking of the first question, knowing your targeted audience is a very popular advice given to any technical writer. You might have encountered it multiple times. What it means exactly that we need to understand the needs of our users, but also we need to understand how to communicate with them, is in which language, what kind of terminology to use, how to express ourselves, and in which format do we want to communicate with them. Most importantly, you have to think about your targeted audience or your users to put yourself, at least mentally, imaginarily, in their position, in their shoes, to be able to see your product and documentation from their eyes. The second question, what is the goal of our communication? Well, it's the question that actually Diataxis helps us with, I hope. It structures the answer to that question as much as possible, so it's easier for you to address in your documentation and optimize it specifically for the needs of users. Specifically, if we think about what our users want to do by reading our documentation, most often we come to multiple answers, really. Sometimes they need to learn a skill, how exactly to use our tooling, or how to do something, a skill of programming, for example. And sometimes they want to do something practical, like a specific action, how to deploy a web server, or how to deploy our software, or how to do anything really, but very specific, very actionable. And some other times they might just need to understand some concepts and ideas behind our product to be able to understand its value and how to use it properly. And finally, I find it quite often that in sophisticated software, we need to supply our users with some kind of specific data required for using it. Sometimes it comes from the API commands description, or just a list of commands, really. And these kind of four categories, we'll get back to them later. You just, for now, keep in mind that we have this question, what are the needs of our user in mind when we're thinking about how to use Diataxis. And the core interesting idea here, I think, that we cannot optimize for everything at the same time. We should probably specialize our communication and achieving at least one goal at a time, that the most efficiently so. So if our user wants to learn a skill, we should address that particular need as much as we can, basically deprioritizing the three other needs in this particular communication. But if our user needs everything, maybe that's best to address all of these needs separately, as in one need at a time with multiple different documents or sections of a document. But in that way, each section and each document will be optimized for achieving this goal, and we won't lose, the structural integrity and narrative anywhere. So talking about needs of the user, I just told you we have these four categories, and if we simplify them down to, just a minimum amount of word, I think we can name them as learn, do, understand, and get data, right? How can we help them, our users or readers, do exactly that, do one of those? Well, we need to create a communication or a document specifically addressing this need. And second of point, which is actually quite important too, is we need to be able to navigate our user to the exact content that they need. Basically, if they need to learn a skill or do some action, we need to be able to make them find the exact piece of content that addresses their need. Otherwise, it's inefficient, right? So I think the Diataxis, and specifically these four categories, address exactly these two problems. First of all, optimizing content for these needs, and second of all, solving the navigation problems for the users. let's talk about goals specifically and the two dimensions and how they work. Basically, we have, well, two axes, right? Theory and practice, which are on the opposite sides. So basically, we cannot have both. If we optimize something, we either optimize for it to be more practical or more theoretical, right? We cannot do both. It's not working like that, at least in Diataxis, I think. And also the same goes for the study and work. We're either optimizing for, the study, for learning, or we're optimizing for practical work and achieving something. That's exactly the idea behind the four actionable things that our users might want to do, like learn a skill. For me and for the Diataxis, I think it's more like in a study and practice quadrant of the uh, flat two-dimensional space, right? As for doing action or some practical, guidance, it's more like practice work, right? How to achieve something practical, lies in this upper right corner. For the understanding a concept or an idea, we obviously have to study some theory, and yeah, it comes down to the theory and study quadrant. And for the theory and work, we have reference data. So basically some knowledge that we just need to have. We not exactly need to understand it. So if we add specific labels to each of these quadrants for learning a skill, the closest label that I think we could master is tutorials. Basically, tutorials as a type of documentation or kind of documentation. They are pursuing exactly that. They are trying to teach you a new skill. They're trying to make you learn a new skill. So if you think about a cooking tutorial, that would be the closest analogy, I think, example of that. If we're thinking about doing an action, we have practical how-to guides. Well, how-to guides answers the question how to do something, right? So it even sounds very close to step-by-step instruction how to achieve something practical. That's exactly it. It's a task-oriented guidance. In the understanding the concept quadrant, we have a so-called explanation category, which is, well, quite obvious why it's there. And in the reference section, well, get some reference data in the reference. So we quite often create this references section in our documentation to supply our users with lots of data they might need using our product. That's what it is about, right? It's a theory, but more like practical oriented theory rather than understanding or study oriented. Why it might be so important to address the needs of users, but apart from the obvious thing of user satisfaction, because if we prioritize user needs, probably we maximize the chances of the needs, I mean, being achieved or solved or at least satisfied. And in that way, we actually satisfy our users. They feel happy about using our product if they satisfy their needs. That's the most direct way, really. But on top of that, we have some more benefits, as in if we go in for user needs, we usually find our documentation to become more stable, as in the user needs, they rarely change. They usually stay the same. They invariant to some of the changes in our marketing strategy, in our branding, in our, anything. So many different things in our product can change, even the feature names, the name of the product itself, and so on and so on. But if we pursue the user needs, we can find ourselves in a more stable position, addressing the user needs with the same content even after this change. So yes, the stability of our documentation might be improved, and I find it quite often so myself. Another point of view, uh, which means that if we addressing user needs, we inevitably think about the user perspective on the thing, on the product and documentation, which is quite helpful, again, to understand what kind of problems they might have and to predict these problems and maybe make sure that these somehow addressed or fixed. And that's, again, quite a nice way of doing that as soon as possible, solving the user's problems even before they occur. The feedback item here represents basically, if we think about users, we inevitably think about gathering feedback from users and gathering exact feedback. Starts these feedback loops when we actually try to make an iterative approach on improving our content over and over again, doing these sanity checks against our users. It's a very healthy way of doing documentation, I think, and it drives us to continuous improvement without any, missed opportunities or missed expectations, really. For the efficiency part of it, again, it's optimized. If we pursue needs of users, we usually pursue it through addressing the needs one at a time, like I told you about the Diataxis at the very beginning. So it's really optimized in a way that we will be understanding how to improve a document to better address this particular need that we are solving at the moment. So efficiency here is a big issue, big benefit, I think. The four horsemen of Diataxis, or the four categories, let's talk about them in detail. Specifically, the first one I mentioned is tutorial, which is a more or less learning-oriented communication, right? It's a type of communication that addresses the learning part of it. What tutorial answers is, in terms of user needs, is learning a skill or learning a craft, learning something. It's a learning-oriented experience, basically. So the tutorial, is a lesson. It provides an experience, and the end result of a tutorial most often not as important as the experience itself. It's some kind of roller coaster. It does not have to transport us to some other point. It does not have to create some value. The value is the experience itself. And tutorial, well, what it should be doing is really building confidence by providing necessary guidance, hand-holding, if you might, and also concrete and actionable examples so that people can build this confidence, can build the practical skills needed. So some guidelines for creating a better tutorial would be, basically tutorials should be reproducible by users, so they should not encounter any significant roadblocks, obviously, and be able to follow the tutorial themselves without, roadblocks, any problems, or really being blocked by anything. And the next item is building confidence. So if we really build a confusing tutorial, it won't help the experience, as in that will leave them less confident and they will be confused. And that's what we are trying to fight with the tutorial. So optimizing the tutorial in such a way that it builds confidence, gradually increasing the complexity of items we're exploring. That's the way to do so, I guess. Next one is concrete instructions and sample data and examples. If we do a tutorial and we revert to something generic, generic storytelling, how you can do something abstract, and what you could do if you would encounter some abstract generic situation, it's not really helpful. The most helpful tutorial would be more practical and specific than that, I guess. It would go into specific details. So if you have, let's imagine you have this problem, and with these parameters, you would do this command in your software to resolve this, right? In this practical and specific experience with some sample data and examples, that's how people usually learn. They associate this situation with the problem now. That's how associative memory work. What you should not do in the tutorial, though, it's basically having too much explanation. If you try to explain everything in your tutorial, well, you might think that it helps their learning experience, right? They learn a lot, but it's actually not so much, because tutorial, if you remember, it lies in the practice side of things. So it serves the practical needs. Basically, they should learn a skill, not obtain new knowledge through tutorials. So too much explanation can be a problem here. What is too much? Of course, it's up to you to decide, but whenever you find yourself explaining, a full paragraph of explanation going in a tutorial, that might be a red flag a little bit, at least to track your attention to that particular issue. What's next? Significant choices in the tutorial. Ideally, tutorial should be like a roller coaster. So people should follow the instructions, but they should not have this, divergence when they have to decide whether I go this way or this way. Ideally, tutorial is single way without this, divergence at all. So basically, you have an exact trajectory for the implant, and all the instructions to follow, they will lead you there. They will lead the users to the exact experience you want them to go through. That how it's usually done. Too much divergence can create variances in user experience, and you're not sure whether your user actually experienced what you planned to do, or did they revert it to some backup scenario, something like that. And also it creates confusion quite often, yes. And also, like said before, the tutorial being too generic and covering too many different options and not going into specific details, that might be a lot of problem because it does not create this practical experience for users. They must have an ability to say that they have experienced something, they have some practical experience working with it after they completed the tutorial. Let's move on to the how to guide. Basically, how to guide is a task-oriented communication. What we're trying to solve here is a user need of actually accomplishing something practical. They have some assignments, some tasks, some problem to solve, and we have a specific how to guide, how to do just that. And that practicality of the communication must be prioritized here, as in it must be a recipe, a step-by-step instruction how to achieve the practical goal. Usually the goal is in the title of the how to guide. So completing the task at hand is the goal here. The experience that inevitably goes with it is not the goal here. It's not a tutorial. Hence, the shorter the path to the goal, is better. So the shorter the how to guide it, the better. We just need to make sure that our users have an ability to follow it, of course. But usually optimization for how to guide is literally cutting out everything redundant and making sure that the instructions are step by step and very clear, like almost algorithmic to this point, especially if we're talking about developer-oriented documentation. Since the result is very important, here the practical result, of course, we at the end of the how to guide, we highlight what kind of result to expect. Maybe we check the result, but we do not go into too much detail in samples and examples of practical nature. We might have this how to guide a little bit more generic rather than that. We just explain what kind of command they should use and what kind of data they should use in this command, or what kind of data they might need, and some guidance how to do that. But it's not a tutorial, so there might be not a specific command for them to run, but rather instructions how to run some generic command with the arguments they need in their particular case, and how to choose these arguments. You see, this how-to guide can have a little bit more divergence and variability than a tutorial. Still doesn't have to be confusing. It must be, a balance, but it must cover more generic storytelling to be able to cover more generic situation, to be able to cover multiple scenarios usually, but all leading to the same task or issue being resolved. That's usually the case. And again, I cannot stress this enough, how to guide serves practical needs. So we are reducing the number of explanations in it usually. So optimization guides, be practical, actionable. That's what I was just saying. We should not go into theory too much. Have clear objective task. That's very important, and usually it's in the title of the how-to guide, but sometimes it's not. Anyway, you should address that right from the start. So the how-to guide should be easily searchable by the task it completes, so it helps to complete, and that's very important. And be generic enough to be applicable in a variety of situations that might happen during, achieving this task. If the task can be, or issue or goal can be achieved in multiple ways, how to guide might even, cover all the different variants, different ways of doing that. Or you might revert to splitting it into multiple communications, as in multiple documents or sections, talking about different ways of doing the same stuff. What it should not do is have too much explanation, like I already mentioned. It should not be too theoretic, as in you should not provide too much, data inside the how to guide, too much explanation again. You should be as much as you can practical, and you should not digress from the shortest path. As in, yet again, to optimize the how to guide, you need to cut out everything redundant. You go straight to your goal. Everything that can help people, you might consider it, but if down the line you're just helping them understand, not helping them achieve the goal, it might be redundant. You might add some links to some other communications, like explanations or other sections of Diataxis if you want to, but putting the content in the how to guide is a very strict endeavor. If it's practical and it serves the goal and you absolutely cannot go without it, of course you need it. If you can't go without it, of course you need to consider just cutting it out. Now let's talk about explanation as a category or kind of documentation as per Diataxis. So it's understanding-oriented communication. What it means is it deepens users' understanding of something. It does not have to explain a concept, from top to bottom. It does not have to go into very depths. It's just for the sake of your product, you figure that you need to communicate to user some concept and you need them to understand it enough. You don't want them to be, an expert in this field. You just want them to understand this concept to be able to use your product, really. So that's the amount of explanation needed. You explain a concept. Maybe it's a very important concept of your product. Maybe even your product is a very unique one that has new concepts invented just for the sake of its existence. Maybe it's some commonly known concepts in the area, but you expect some of your users might not be aware of them, and it might, deteriorate the experience. Of course, you need to understand them, and that's the specific type of communication doing just that. So it serves our study basically not just find new data, but rather to find the understanding of something, of some idea. Quite often, it just provides additional context, which is rather helpful. And also it helps to consolidate, illustrate, clarify some specific topic that is needed, right? So it doesn't have to just supply a bunch of data. It rather needs to make all the effort possible for users to understand it. So what explanation should be is it should be offering additional context. It should deepen users' understanding of the product or technology behind it. It also should probably cover such questions like why or how, what else, what if. Most often it's why. Sometimes it's how. The rest is less popular, I guess. What explanations should not do is they should not be practical or too practical rather. So any step-by-step instructions usually is a red flag for explanation specifically. Any specific instructions what to do or any specific examples with the sample data, sample commands, usually that might be a little bit too much because again, we're talking about the theory of it and the study of theory and the understanding of concepts. Sometimes it's needed, but just make sure it's not a how-to guide anymore, right? It has to be an explanation of some theory. And the last section out of 4 is reference. It's information-oriented communication that really serves the user need of getting this data. For the sake of using our product, they need this data. They need to know this, or rather maybe not even know in their head, but they need this data to be accessible to them, to be able to use it with our product. For example, that might be some reference data on some parameters they need to, take into account when using our product, or some list of commands that they can use with our product, anything really. So usually these kind of documents or references, they are very well structured. They have a very authoritative language. They have a, very neutral language actually. It's a neutral source of theoretical knowledge, really. It's a very trustworthy, neutral source of knowledge for users, and it must feel that way. So it's usually a good idea to employ some tables or lists in references, but there is an expectation of the data to be actually objective and complete in the reference. So if you provide a list of elements, most of the time you should at least expect for the table or the list to be complete. So if there are some other options that you cannot list for some reason, maybe the list will be too long, or table will be too long, or you just theoretically cannot express everything that goes in there, you just add a category like that, like and others or etc., something like that. So this adds the trustworthiness to the reference data, and it's actually very, very important in addressing the exact reason why users basically read this. They read this to gain data. Everything not on this table, we consider it either not existing in this particular context or not relevant. So if you just cannot put something in there, create a kitchen sink category for it. It's important. And optimization guidelines for references, they should be reliable, they should be complete and objective, like I said. What that means exactly, that you provide or supply users with the data they need, not too much, not to not lacking. But the data you provide should be objective. You should not encourage any kind of engagement marketing in this data, of course, not even a tint of it. And also, you should probably abstain from using any instructions. You should really not go into how to or a tutorial in reference. That's a big red flag for reference. And you should not explain anything. Again, there is a dedicated type of communication to doing just that. So since we have gone through all 4 categories, here is a little cheat sheet about these 4 categories for you to help you be able to more efficiently and reliably classify content. If you see some piece of content that you want to understand whether it serves study or work, or whether it actually describes practical steps or knowledge, you usually be able to determine answers to these questions. But the category, well, everyone feels the tutorial, how to guide and reference and explanation sections a little bit different. So there might be a little bit misalignment in people's understanding what's the thin line between a tutorial and a how to guide. So to address exactly that, we should not rely on our intuition to classify, but rather we should use this cheat sheet and try to, have a formal process answering the first 2 questions and having a conclusion out of that, which category that. And sometimes even for myself, I find that my intuition tells me a different story when I'm trying to compare these results of this cheat sheet and my own intuition. Sometimes it surprises me still yet, even with my experience, it can be tricky sometimes to classify. And what I'm telling you about classifying is very, very important, because it's super important to actually be able to navigate users to the content that you've created just for them to solving their needs, right? So you already put it all the effort to optimize communications as much as possible to address one user need at a time, and they're very nice and they're very useful and they're very efficient. But the last and very important crucial step is to make users to actually read it, to make users access it, to make users see it. And that's sometimes it's a bit tricky. And in Canonical, we employ a special navigation practice, as in putting the 4 categories of Diataxis at the navigation menu at the very top. So the top 4 categories of our navigation menus are almost always the same: the tutorials, how-to guides, explanations, and references. And that helps a lot, especially since we have a lot of different documentation, because we have a lot of different products. And our users quite often find themselves using multiple of our products together, because we're building the whole ecosystem of products. And they, again, have this experience working with some other product, and now switching to some new product. They have the similar experience in documentation. They know what to expect. They already have this habit of looking for practical guide and a how to guide section, of looking for some skills, initial familiarity with the product in the tutorial section, looking for data in the reference section. They already have this good explanation, the good understanding of how Diataxis works, and that helps a lot. But for some other users, like let's imagine a person who is first time arrived in our documentation, never encountered Diataxis, that might be a little bit challenging. So the important part here is to be able to communicate to them the idea that they can find information, practical guidance here, on learning a skill here. That should be done through proper naming of each page or each document or each section of your bigger document, if you have a single documentation. That's really, really important, and that helps a lot, again, with Diataxis. And to illustrate this, I usually do this practical exercise. I'm not sure we'll be able to do any interactivity here during this session, so I'll probably just go real quick through them myself to explain you a little bit how it works. So basically, we have a list of, roughly named documents on the right. It's specifically designed list of, sometimes not that obvious names. And I will try to classify it on these coordinates that we have, basically to explain how it works usually in real life. So the first one we have is how to deploy on AWS. It's a cloud platform. I'm not sure whether everyone knows what that, but it doesn't matter. It's really a how to deploy, how to install something on a cloud platform. That's really what it is. So this document even sounds like a how-to guide, right? It starts with the question of how, and that's a very important tip here that actually tells us the how-to guide, and it's quite correct because we have a very practical goal, a task at hand that we want to achieve, and we provide instructions how to do that. So that's exactly what it is. It's how to guide. Next, we have a troubleshooting, which is not very obvious where to put it. So if we go, ideating what a troubleshooting is, it can go into, again, a how-to guide because we usually provide instructions how to troubleshoot a product, how to gather some log messages, how to actually get unstuck in some cases, how to debug a situation, how to troubleshoot, basically. So it can be in a how-to guide, but I also can see it in some other categories, less so for a tutorial, but yet again, you never know. Some products might need a dedicated tutorial section for troubleshooting. Why not? For the explanation part, I also can see troubleshooting, so it's not very clear. It's rather what you want to put in it, what the content of this page is, rather than just a title, you see? So the title might be improved here to actually say how to troubleshoot, maybe, or something like this to improve the user experience, to be able to understand what kind of content they will find in there. Or just placing in this document in a section called how to guides might also tell them what kind of content to expect inside. Next one is getting started, which is quite often I find in the tutorial section because it's less of a practical goal, right? What's getting started? It's not something tangible. It's not too specific. It's just the very first steps. We kind of want to teach them the first baby steps with our product. So I quite often find in tutorial, and it can be better. It's not the perfect name for it, but yes, some products like that naming, so why not? Next one, creating a secure connection. That's a very interesting one because it has this creating at the beginning. Some might say that it looks like a how-to guide, and they might be right. Yes, it can be a very practical guide on how to create a secure connection. But usually, if we do how-to guides, we revert to more, imperative language just to say, well, create a secure connection or how to create a secure connection or something like this. Creating a secure connection sounds like a step in a tutorial to me, to be honest, but it can also be something in the explanation section if we're really explaining some underlying specifics of algorithms and protocols behind it, not the exact steps needed or not a learning experience of just figuring out and learning a skill. So it can be either tutorial or explanation. It really depends again on the contents of it. And yet again, it's an indicator that we might want to improve the title of the page to be more specific, to be less ambiguous about that. Well, backup and restore, again, just from the language of it, it's rather imperative. So I would say it can be a how-to guide most likely, and it would look very nice in the how-to guide territory. But yet again, we can put it in the tutorial if the contents of it is more like a learning experience. It's just a step of a tutorial talking about backupping and restoring stuff and going through an experience of doing so. Again, Markdown syntax, the next one. It's a very interesting one because, well, what we expect there, the description of syntax most likely. I would say that syntax of any language, even a lightweight markup language, I would say that it falls into category of reference documentation most quite often because it provides us just with information. Yes, sometimes there are some examples for the commands in there, but down the line is just a list of possible syntax operands and not much else. Well, sometimes it's not, but really down to the basis, it's a list or a table. So quite often it's a reference. Next one is API documentation, which is quite often in the reference section. Again, it just supplies us with all necessary information without too much of an explanation, without too much of a, how to achieve some concrete practical goal. Well, job runner. Suddenly we have job runner and we have no idea what that concept is, right? We're not talking about some specific area here, so it's rather ambiguous what it could be, but just from looking at it, I see the name of some kind of a concept. And usually if we naming a concept, we're going into either how to use the concept, but we don't see any indicative, words about that, or we talk about what the concept is. We're trying to explain the concept or provide some information about it. So I would say it must be in the lower sections, as in it's either reference or an explanation. I would put it in the explanation as an explanation of the concept of a job runner, but it really depends again on the concept, and we really can improve this name. I hope so. Either by putting it in the relevant section or just addressing the title itself, changing it. Why microservice architecture document? Well, it directly addresses the question of why, which is previously we listed, is one of the questions the explanation sections might want to do. So yeah, it's pretty obvious that we should put it in the explanation section, I think. At rate limiting strategy, the last one we have, well, any strategy is more or less theoretic, right? It should not have step-by-step guides or some kind of learning experience. Most likely it's an explanation section. If it's rather just informing us about some facts, it might be a reference, but I would still consider it to be an explanation. So if we look at the next slide, it's just more or less similar answers to what I just told you. So what I find more or less interesting about this particular stuff, that some of the documents might be further from the center of these dimensions, right, of this axis, and some of them might be, closer to it in the center. So the idea of Diataxis is optimization. Basically, we optimize for 4 different categories. So the further away your particular, document is from the middle, means that it's better optimized. The further it's away, the better it is optimized. So it's better for the document to be further away. It's better for the document to be deep inside explanation territory, deep inside any other category territory, right? Than to be in the middle and doing everything at once. So optimization here is the key for success. And in conclusion, I want to share some very useful resources that you see on your screen right now. The first one is the website created by Daniela Prasida about the Diataxis framework. It contains lots of information about it and about every category and how to use it, some practical steps and guides how to do so, and some very interesting ideas on how to implement it. We also have a collection of our own documentation that is applying the Diataxis. So if you're looking for some examples of how to do that, feel free to check docs.ubuntu.com and see one of our documentation sets to see how Diataxis is being used. And also there is a very interesting video by Daniele for basically the same topic, Diataxis introduction. You might want to see that video if you feel like I'm confusing everyone and not explaining things too good. And thank you very much. That concludes, my talk at the moment. If you have any questions, I'm ready to answer.
Thank you, Vladimir. Does anyone have any questions? I have one if nobody else has any questions. I was just wondering whether with a lot of tech writers, we are, for efficiency reasons, we are encouraged to reuse content, and reusability of content has been a sort of a bit of an article of faith in tech writing, especially if you're using other frameworks such as Ditta or DocBook. Is there do you find that there is still scope to write multi-purpose content within the Diataxis framework, or does it does it kind of and I'm not saying I'm not saying it's a bad thing if not, but do you find that there is still scope within Diataxis to get those efficiencies that we've been typically asked to get from reusability?
Yes, I do find a lot of room for using reusability with Diataxis. Specifically, as a strong advocate of Dox's code approach, I find single sourcing is the very right approach for this, as in we can publish multiple formats of our documentation with the same content being used in all of them. And that's very, very useful, and it's very advised. But if we have really multiple documents with the same content going in there, we should really think about what goal we're achieving with these documents and what type of, well, as per Diataxis, type of documentation we're talking about. If all of these documents are of the same category, that's good. So we're basically having the same approach for these documents, as in they're addressing the similar needs. So the way we communicate in these ideas would be similar. For example, if we have multiple how-to guides that have similar passages in them, maybe it's just authentication part that we need to go every time through or something like that. Why not? Of course, we can reuse stuff. But if we have a single piece of content that we consider adding in multiple different types of documents, for example, a how-to guide and an explanation and a reference, well, that's where you might think twice about it. I'm not saying you should never do that. It's not about absolute decisions. It's about really optimization. So this strikes me as an example of a red flag for optimization. If you have similar content and it's not like just a notice about something, like a formal thing, but it's real piece of content, like some kind of guidance instructions or some blurb of text, and it goes into multiple types of the documentation as per Diataxis, that's a troubling symptom, I think.
Mm. Interesting, yeah. Yeah, and I can sort of see I quite like the distinction between actual instructional step-by-step how to for a specific goal versus something that's a bit more elaborated upon for kind of training and learning purposes. But often I think it is quite easy to kind of make those things almost the same when they perhaps shouldn't be the same. So yeah, I think that's really interesting. Has everyone else got any questions? If we've not got questions, I'll give everyone 9 minutes of their lunch hour back. Going once, going twice. Okay, thank you everyone. Thank you very much for coming. Thank you, Vladimir. That was a great talk. Super interesting. And we will see you hopefully in September for a catch up on ISTC mentoring. All right, have a lovely weekend, everybody.
Thank you.